Workers' Memorial Day is held to remember those killed, injured and made unwell by their work, and to renew our efforts to organise collectively to prevent more deaths, injuries and disease as a result of work. Each year in Wolverhampton, trade unionists and members of the labour movement gather at the Workers' Memorial Peace Tree near the cenotaph. We hold a short ceremony, listen to speakers and lay wreaths to commemorate those who have suffered. This year, sadly, we are unable to do this as we are on lockdown and all observing social isolation due to COVID-19 or coronavirus. Never was the message and ethos of Workers' Memorial Day more needed, more significant, more relevant and more poignant. The theme for this year's Workers' Memorial Day is the coronavirus pandemic.
Hello, this is John Oakley, Unite WM615 Oakland Secretary. Welcome to this year's Workers' Memorial Day. Our slogan this year, as ever, is Remember the Dead and Fight for the Living. This is to remember those workers who have lost their lives or sustained serious or minor injury both during this year and also in the years gone by, and for those people who are still in pain and are fighting to recover their health. We are bringing together workers and their representatives from all over the world to remember the dead and fight for the living. This year we are all working in unique circumstances, as the coronavirus pandemic affects every worker, regardless of sector or locality. Hundreds have lost their lives to the virus whilst working on the front line, acting to protect the public and to keep society running. Workers are risking their lives every day, whilst many are still attending work ill-equipped and without necessary safety measures in place. We could not have a starker reminder of the important role of trade union health and safety reps in saving and protecting workers' lives. If we can, but without forgetting the above statements, we must not forget the following facts. One worker dies every 15 seconds worldwide. 6,000 workers die every day. More than 2 million men and women die as a result of work-related accidents and diseases per year. Workers suffer approximately 270 million accidents each year and fall victim to some 160 million incidents of work-related illnesses. Hazardous substances kill 440,000 workers annually. Asbestos claims 100,000 lives. Please take care, and Unite Wolverhampton 615 branch wish everyone a peaceful and safe future.
So, my name is Warinder Juss. I am a solicitor at Thompson's Solicitors and an executive council member of the GMB, my trade union, as well as the branch equality officer for my branch. First of all, I want to thank all of the frontline workers, the NHS workers, the care workers, the shop workers, the refuse workers, those working in pharmacies, and everyone else who has kept this country running and looking after us whilst we face a very traumatic and unsettling period. My love for these workers is, however, accompanied with a feeling of anger at the way that this government has treated those who look after us. As trade unionists, we have for years campaigned for proper personal protective equipment, for risk assessments, and for proper funding in order to ensure that health and safety measures as required by the law are implemented. We have always asked what the law has required. But in this current pandemic, we have seen health workers having to use bin bags in order to make aprons, and also learned that those health workers then contracted coronavirus, putting their lives at risk, their families' lives at risk, and those whom they treat. We are facing unprecedented times. All of us are having to face challenges we've never had before. But this state of unpreparedness is as a result of a complete lack of care by a Tory government who just did not think it was important to protect our health and social services and to look after the health and safety of workers. That is why the TUC last Tuesday announced that the government, towards the end of 2020, should have an independent, judge-led public inquiry to look at the grotesque failure to provide PPE to frontline workers. We have even heard cases of workers being threatened with disciplinary action when they have raised concerns about PPE. The theme for this year's International Workers' Memorial Day was going to be on the theme of occupational stress and related conditions. Just imagine this. If you have a worker, a health worker, who is going into work without proper PPE, not knowing whether that is going to be the day when they might contract the virus, can you imagine how stressful that must be? Knowing that their lives are at risk, their families' lives at risk, and others' lives at risk. As a trade union movement, as a labour movement, it has always been us who've looked after workers. And now, more than ever, as our chair of our Trades Council said, this year's Workers' Memorial Day has never been more relevant, more significant, as it has been this year. The theme, the slogan has always been, remember the dead and fight for the living. And what we must do now is be united as a trade union and labour movement and use all of our resources to collectively fight all the injustices that workers face at work.
This pandemic affects every worker. Already tens of thousands of workers around the world have lost their lives. Many more have fallen ill and may continue to go to work ill-equipped and without the necessary safety measures in place. In Britain, the trade union movement was horrified as Boris Johnson announced to the country we were facing the spread of the virus. He warned us that we would lose loved ones and then achieve herd immunity. Many health professionals and trade unionists challenge this concept, which is scientifically unproven for coronavirus. He did not propose any action or measures to tackle the virus. He just stood back and watched. It was 7 weeks from the first recorded case of coronavirus in Britain before action was taken to prevent the spread of the virus. We're now on our 6th week of lockdown. Compare this to Germany that tested from the start, identified contacts immediately and isolated them, stopping the virus in its tracks and returning to work this week with a lower death toll than in Britain and the rest of Europe. In Britain, it's clear that despite the protestation of the Conservative Cabinet and Prime Minister, our NHS and key workers are not being provided with all that they need to do their jobs safely. We've gone from a situation where the various cabinet members initially insisted they had enough PPE. It was just a case of delivering it. Don't worry, they said, we'll get the army to distribute it. Still there are problems. Don't worry, an order on its way from Turkey. Oh no, it's been delayed. Some consultants and doctors around the country have taken unprecedented action and have begun to write and lay bare the lies of the government because they're so worried about their colleagues being expected to work without appropriate masks, gowns, visors and gloves to keep them safe while they care for those who are ill. Finally, the government has recognised they're ill-prepared and running out of the necessary PPE. What is their response? To change the guidelines and advise reuse of equipment designed for single use. They seem to be deliberately ignorant of cross-contamination issues in a way that beggars belief. In the middle of it all, Boris himself succumbed to the virus, and from his broadcasts he clearly had the fright of his life as he struggled in intensive care. I wonder what he thinks of herd immunity now. Let's hope he hears the message loud and clear PPE for all frontline workers dealing with the fight against coronavirus, and test. Workers' Memorial Day is intended to serve as a rallying cry to remember the dead, but more than ever this year we need to fight like hell for the living. Thank you.
Hi all, it's Chris Pugh, West Midlands Regional Health and Safety Officer, also Health and Safety Officer for UNISON West Midlands. As you rightly say, health and safety at work has never had more significance in these trying times, and we must not forget ever the lives that have been lost at this most sad and difficult time to those on the front line. Throughout the NHS and all care workers and people who have sadly died. But also we cannot forget the people who have lost their lives whilst at work over the past years. But the most important part of this is that health and safety funding must not have to be cut anymore. If you remember what this government said a few years ago, including the Prime Minister, he said health and safety is a burden round businesses' necks. It has now come to haunt them because they were never prepared for this. And when you think that we do not have the proper equipment to deal with this crisis, it just shows that although health and safety is discussed at most of our meetings, it is still not a top priority. And after all of this, this has to change. And I hope the trade unions will force the government to rethink the health and safety policy. For the good of this country, and at least then the lives that have been sadly lost would not have been in vain. And to everyone at work or working from home or the general public, please stay safe. Chris Pugh, City of Wolverhampton Council, UNISON General Branch and West Midlands Health and Safety Officer.
Hello, Adrian Turner, UNISON City of Wolverhampton Branch, sending comradely greetings to workers everywhere on this Workers' Memorial Day, 28th of April 2020. This year more than ever is demonstrating the need for strong trade unions organising in workplaces for improved health and safety. We're now in the 6th week of the coronavirus lockdown, with UNISON members both in the NHS and in local government on the front line of fighting the virus, with hundreds already having paid the ultimate sacrifice because of a lack of planning and a lack of PPE and a government that did too little too late. Locally, since the first day of the lockdown, our branch has been arguing for social distancing guidelines to be adhered to and for PPE in all workplaces. PPE, that's personal protective equipment, not shared equipment. It should go to all workers wherever required. Our branch have even sourced our own supply of full face masks for distribution for workers who are on the front line. These are the masks here. These things really can save lives. NHS staff, care workers, cleaners, refuse workers, school support staff, all of us have a role to play in beating the virus. If you can, stay at home. If you go out, keep your distance. If you are at work, demand the correct PPE. Remember the dead, fight for the living. Join a union and organise for safer workplaces. Stay safe. Solidarity from UNISON, City of Wolverhampton Branch.
Hello, here's a message for Workers' Memorial Day from Unite the Union Black Country Cluster. Stay safe and fight for the living. Stop the pandemic in the workplace. Now these are strange times and we've closed all our offices throughout the West Midlands, but we've never been busier. Our officers are working along with our reps to ensure that workplaces are safe, that those who need PPE get PPE, that there's safe distancing in workplaces. So there's been a job to do, a very important job, and it's to protect people. And every day we're giving advice to workers on basic health and safety. Their right to refuse to work in an unsafe workplace. Something that, though it's part of our job, it's not something that we would do on a daily basis, but that quite clearly there's a legal right to be able to refuse to work if you don't believe that you're safe, or you believe you're putting yourself or even members of your family or other people at risk. So we've had a very busy time in doing that, and we're headed to a different world, a new normal. And when things resume to start to get more normal, there's going to be more work to deal with the consequences of this virus, whether that is economic consequences, and there will be some significant economic consequences. We can see that already appearing in the locality, and the mental strain that people have been under during this very unusual time. So there's a lot of work to be done by us trade unions going forward, and I would say to us all, stop the pandemic in the workplace. Remember the dead. Fight for the living.
Hello, my name's Grace Millar. I'm a UCU member and a delegate to Trades Council, and I just want to say how important I think Workers' Memorial is every year, but particularly this year, when workers around the world have been struggling so hard against the coronavirus, and that essential workers have been endangered by inadequate protection of PPE. I think it's so important that we remember the dead. Yes, we must remember all who have died at work over the past year, but just as important as that we fight for the living.
A day late and a dollar short. It's an old American expression explaining the struggles of working people to pay their rent. It's another way of saying too little, too late. It sums up the contempt which 4 successive Conservative governments have had for the safety of people working in health and care services right now. Now, the UK's entire national security infrastructure is still set up to prevent traditional threats, invasions, terrorist attacks, something created by an enemy. But a virus operates in a different way. A virus doesn't hold press conferences threatening death and destruction, nor release propaganda videos. A virus doesn't carry out nuclear weapons tests or directly dismantle democracy. But the Conservative government can't say they were never warned about this pandemic. They were warned by the government's own high-powered bodies on 6 different occasions in the last 10 years. Firstly, in 2010, the government's own National Risk Register was published. It said that a pandemic would lead to, quote, wide social and economic disruption, significant threats to the continuity of essential services, lower production levels, shortages and distribution difficulties. They went on to say, individual organisations may suffer from the pandemic's impact on staff absenteeism, thereby reducing the services available. That was the first warning. The second one was again in 2010 in the wake of the swine flu pandemic. The UK government's own national security strategy was written by the government's National Security Council. It said that the risk of a pandemic was greater than the risk of a military invasion. They went on to say, and I quote, the risk of human pandemic disease remains one of the highest we face. The possible impacts of a future pandemic could be that up to 1/2 of the UK population becomes infected, resulting in between 50,000 and 750,000 premature deaths in the UK, with corresponding disruption to everyday life. End of quote. Sound familiar? That was in 2010. In their joint forward to that 2010 document, the bumbling David Cameron and the self-regarding Nick Clegg wrote, "Our ability to meet these current and future threats depends crucially on tackling the budget deficit. An economic deficit is also a security deficit. Tough choices would need to be made." Well, in 2010, the leader of the National Security Council was a man called Peter Ricketts. His title was National Security Advisor. This April, after the COVID-19 pandemic hit, he commented ruefully, "We put it up in lights, but it never got the resourcing because there was always an immediate crisis. The swine flu pandemic should have been a wake-up call. I don't know why more wasn't done. There was always a higher priority than buying more ventilators." So that was the second warning. The third warning was in 2015, when there was an updated national security strategy, authored by the then National Security Advisor, Mark Grant. Again, it categorised a pandemic as a Tier 1 risk. This year, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Mr. Grant stated, "Getting the Treasury to allocate money for contingencies is extremely difficult. I don't recall the Department of Health arguing that they needed more money to meet this risk." Now, the main reason that the Treasury and the Department of Health were reluctant to spend any extra money on dealing with the possibility of a pandemic is because the government repeatedly and wrongly claimed there was no extra money for anything. The fourth warning was in October 2016. That's when the government carried out its own 3-day pandemic preparedness simulation. It was an exercise called Exercise Cygnus. It involved all the major government departments, plus the NHS and local authorities from around the country. That exercise showed gaping holes in Britain's Emergency Preparedness, Resilience and Response Plan. There is no evidence that the Conservative government implemented any of the recommendations in the consequent report, and the government still refuses to release that report. What a surprise. The fifth warning was in 2017, when the government itself published a new National Risk Register. It noted that the likelihood of emerging infectious disease had increased in the previous 2 years since the 2015 National Security Strategy. Yet, instead of promising sufficient money, the Minister for Resilience and Efficiency, the Tory MP Caroline Noakes, suggested, and I'm not making this up, she said, quote, "The UK's long experience with resilience will be enough. Call it what you will, but whether through the fabled stiff upper lip, blitz spirit, or just a stubborn determination, our resilience can be seen at the forefront of our handling emergencies." End of quote. So that's all right then. We got the coronavirus pandemic, the stiff upper lip will get us through. That seems to be the Tory approach. That was the fifth warning in 2017. The sixth warning was in 2019. The Cabinet Office produced a 600-page report called the National Security Risk Assessment. That report was signed off by both Sir Patrick Vallance, who's the government's chief scientific advisor, and signed off by the Prime Minister's own senior national security advisor. This risk assessment urged the UK government to have a comprehensive plan to deal with a pandemic virus and its potentially catastrophic social and economic consequences. The recommendations included the need to stockpile personal protective equipment, organise advanced purchase agreements for other essential kit, establish procedures for disease surveillance and contact tracing, and to draw up plans to manage a surge in excess deaths. Warnings in 2010, again in 2010, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2019. 6 warnings, all of them ignored. They didn't do anything. Bit of a pattern here. For Conservative governments, the risk of a pandemic was too much bother for the rich and powerful, even when the government's own security bodies warned them 6 times in the last 10 years. That's how much Tory governments care about your health and safety and mine.
Activist, chair of our Black Members Group and also chair of the West Midlands Black Members Subgroup. At this time, while this pandemic is all around us, this will have a great effect on all of us. This could bring on work stress within our own personal life and also at work. But at this time, this will affect our mental health also. With the lack of PPE, which is having an effect on all workers, and especially on our National Health Service and our key workers and our support workers. For me, this has had a great effect because I'm one of those who's on that list who cannot go out. I'm on a lockdown. This has had some effect on my mental health, with the lack of contact with my family and friends, but also what makes it even worse for me is that I'm not out there doing my bit also, helping our members. So this is why it's important for all of us to join the union, because the union is there to help you. But on this day, the 28th of April, is Workers' Memorial Day, and we're going to remember all those who's lost their lives during going to work. They leave their house in the morning saying bye to their loved ones, and they don't return back due to the lack of health and safety. But with this pandemic, right, this is the reason why we should remember Workers' Memorial Day, because the amount of people who's lost their loved ones, especially in the National Health Service and support workers, looking after people in the community, this has had a great detrimental effect. But for me, I wish I was out there doing my bit, but obviously I can't. But all I can say is that please, please, please join the trade union. Thank you. Bye.
Hello, my name's Andrew Scattergood. I'm the Regional Secretary for the Fire Brigade Union in the West Midlands, and I'm honoured to make this short video for Wolverhampton and Bilston Trades Council and their celebration for International Workers' Memorial Day. Now, it's never been so important, this event, with coronavirus sweeping across the globe, killing hundreds of thousands of workers. Now, I represent firefighters, and we're no stranger to the threat that our work can face to us, the dangers that sometimes you're not able to go home from work. And this year brings new challenges with coronavirus, with firefighters across the world dying from the exposure through their work to the virus. Now, I want to pay tribute to the health and safety reps who work tirelessly year in, year out for the safety of our members and others in other unions who fight for others' safety there. And now this year, our health and safety reps have been working even harder than usual if that is possible, trying to make sure that our members have the right PPE, have the right procedures in our response to COVID-19. So today we remember all the workers who have died because of their work. I will also take a special moment to remember all the firefighters who have died through their work, including all those firefighters who have died through coronavirus this year. I also renew my commitment and our union's commitment to fight for the best possible health and safety legislation, the best possible protections in the workplace. And this year with coronavirus, we have to up our game even further. And we will do that, we will continue to do that. No matter what restrictions are put on our way of living, we will find ways to overcome that and represent workers the best we possibly can. So this year, we do remember the dead, but we fight like hell for the living and we fight harder than ever. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Clare Simm. I am a member of PCS DWP Birmingham South and a delegate to the Wolverhampton, Bilston and District Aids Council. Every year we talk about the number of workplace deaths there have been in the last 12 months. And this year we are set to see a sharp rise in those numbers under the current climate. And I'm not just talking about the pandemic. I'm talking about the plans to remove guards from trains, the increasing number of attacks that we are seeing on our emergency services workers, and the ever-increasing number of workers who are needing to take time off from their employment with mental health issues. When we all return to work, whether it's weeks or months from now, we cannot lose sight of the other issues that we are facing. What we have come from is completely unprecedented, but we cannot sit back on our laurels at this point. We need to use this time of change to make improvements in our workplaces and make sure that it is a better, safer working environment for everyone. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Nick Kelleher, Secretary of Wolverhampton, Bilston and District Trades Union Council. Public observance of social distancing and keeping safe demonstrates that good health and safety is the most important thing in life. Since the National Health Service was set up in 1948, the British public have seen it as their number one priority for government. Sadly though, cost-cutting and creeping privatisation has left our NHS struggling to cope with this pandemic, and many of its workers have been put at risk due to lack of personal protective equipment, PPE. And as we know, many have fallen victims themselves whilst doing the jobs of caring for people we love. I was a care worker in Wolverhampton Council for 23 years before being made compulsorily redundant. Mine and many of the jobs of my colleagues ended up in the private sector as low-paid work due to government cuts to councils. Now tens of thousands of profit-making private care companies have replaced the hundreds of councils as providers. This has resulted in immense logistical problems for the distribution of PPE, which has meant care workers and care home residents have been put at risk and many have died. We mustn't also forget that it's not just care workers but also bus and train drivers, postal and distribution workers, emergency workers, refuse workers and those still working in shops and schools, and all those other workers who are also performing vital work to keep us all going during lockdown. They too are all still being put at risk and many have suffered as a result. The government's promise of 100,000 tests per day by the end of this month has failed. We are now at the end of April and only a quarter of those tests are currently being carried out. Further promises of expanding the range of people being tested collapse within minutes after such high demand. Even a test is only valid for the day it is taken. Key workers will need regular tests. But there cannot be a complete end to this lockdown until there is mass public testing and a vaccine widely available. The government's furlough scheme may be helping many workers, but for those on low pay or national minimum wage, 80% will not prove enough to live on. When the scheme ends, there is also no guarantee that these jobs will continue, and we expect unemployment to rise. As the pandemic continues, but hopefully ends soon, people will be rethinking their priorities and hopefully be able to plan a better work-life balance. It will also be the time to plan the transformation of society for the needs and well-being of us all, and not for private profit. Now though, if you're not in a union, it's the time as an unorganised worker to join a union. Unions are in the forefront of keeping people safe, and indeed, as we've seen in Wolverhampton, they're even supplying personal protective equipment which will help save the lives of union members and care home residents, because the council and other employers are failing. Remember the dead and fight for the living. Thank you.
Today we mark Workers' Memorial Day, and every year this day is dedicated to those who lose their lives through the jobs they do. This year, of course, foremost in our minds is the tremendous service and the loss of life from those who are in the front line of the battle against the coronavirus. We're thinking of NHS workers, social care workers, bus drivers, everyone who has tragically lost their life trying to help us and protect us. So this year, Workers' Memorial Day has an added significance. And when we come out of this crisis, we're going to have a completely different calculus of the way that we value work and how we look at the people who have helped the country through this terrible crisis. That's going to be a huge priority in years to come, and we have to do justice to those who've lost their lives and those who are trying to help us and protect us every single day.
Hello, Bob Simm, PCS Arms and Unite 6150. Originally I was going to be speaking at the event for this, and I was going to be talking about mental health in the workplace. I think there is going to be a longer discussion that needs to be had about a mental health crisis coming out of everything that's happened recently. I know I've been having trouble in quarantine. I know a lot of other people have, and I think people in the workplace are going to be facing incredible stresses that they haven't had to face before. But I'd like to talk instead about the myth that we've all been putting this together. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about something that happened to me over the last week or so. Over a week ago, I felt quite ill. I have hypertension, and I had incredible chest pains. I had palpitations. My temperature was up. I was panicking, obviously, because of all this. And my blood pressure was very, very high. I phoned 111. They were very good with me. They booked me an appointment that morning for the local doctors. The doctors, I walked around there and I was met at the door by the receptionist, who I recognise, and she was in a very makeshift sort of hazmat suit. She had a plastic smock and a surgical mask and a pair of rubber gloves, and that was it. She threw a pair of gloves and a surgical mask at me across the doorway, and she asked me to put them on before I could come in. I put them on, I went in, and she led me to a small sort of windowless room nearby to wait for the doctor. About 5 minutes later, the doctor comes in. He's wearing the same kind of makeshift hazmat suit. It was just a regular surgical mask, no visor, no sort of goggles, not the proper smock that you've been seeing people wear. It was very, very makeshift, clearly what they just had lying around in the doctor's surgery. He was scared and he was stressed. He didn't want to be in close quarters with someone in this tiny room who might be carrying coronavirus. He didn't want to be there. He checked my heart rate, he checked my blood pressure, and after a very brief 3-minute consultation, he decided to double the medication that I take, and he sent me home. He said he was sorry that he couldn't send me for any of the tests or anything that they'd normally send me for, but at this point his exact words were, "This would be damage limitation." Now, I got home, and I was very ill. Over the course of a week, I barely ate. I had dizzy spells. I couldn't walk. I had a cough. I had all of the symptoms, the fatigue and everything of a bad flu. But I tried. I couldn't get tested. I still can't get tested. Today is the first day I've been able to leave my bedroom. I don't know what I've had, whether it was just a blood pressure issue or not. I don't know what I'm supposed to do going forward. Now, compare this. This is what I'm on about, the myth of us all being in this together. Compare this to Boris Johnson. He falls ill after not following proper advice. He gets tested straight away. He gets sent straight to a hospital, straight to intensive care. You can guarantee his doctors had a lot of the equipment they were supposed to have. And then afterwards, he gets to convalesce at a country retreat. He gets to escape from it all. I'm not belittling the illness that he had. And I'm not saying that prime ministers shouldn't have some kind of rush treatment when it comes to this, but it's still us and them. There's nothing about this that says we're in this together. The government will guarantee up to £2,500 for people's earnings from certain employers. But the rest of us, people who've lost their jobs due to this, we're on universal credit. If we even get the universal credit, which is a pittance. It's not enough to cover our rent. It's not enough to cover our bills. Put into account the other things. If you can't drive, how are you able to get hold of food? The supermarkets and whatnot, they can't send stuff out to you. If you've got an NHS letter, then allegedly you can get stuff from the council, but I'm not sure how well this works as yet. There's so many of these issues where their argument just falls apart. I mean, my brother, he works in a supermarket. He's a security guard. He has no PPE. He's frontline contact with everyone. People who are working behind the counters, they have no PPE. Why are there no calls for normal people who have to go to work, who have to face anyone who could have this illness to also have PPE? It's an absolute disgrace. The one thing that we need to come out of this all with, we need to find a way to make Britain fairer. We need to find a way to make Britain and its rulers kinder. And yeah, we just need to learn. We need to learn all of the lessons that we can from this. Thank you for listening to me. Stay safe and look out for each other. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sharon Dixon. I'm a shop steward for UNISON and also a part of the Trade Union Council in Wolverhampton. On the 28th of April, we normally meet to celebrate Workers' Memorial Day. We normally lay a wreath in remembrance of all of those who have lost their lives at work and those who have been seriously injured. This year is going to be different. In 2020 is a year I think we're not going to forget. A lot of people have lost their lives to coronavirus. Care staff, NHS workers, bus drivers, cleaners and catering staff. It's very sad for me to know as a care assistant to know that care staff has had to be reduced to wearing plastic bags to work to keep their health and safety. So on the 28th of April, I would like you to take a minute's silence to remember all those who have lost their lives from being injured. Health and safety is a big thing for the Trade Union Council and we will always fight for people's health and safety. Also, remember all those abroad in India, China and other countries that provide things for England. We may not know all about these incidents until they come into the news. So once again, please take a thought on the 28th of April to remember those at the Workers' Memorial Day. Thank you.
Hello. I found preparing for my comments today more difficult than in previous years. I guess that's because I never really imagined that I'd find myself living at a time when risk to life at work was anything more than an exceptional thing that we know is always there for some people in some jobs, but that it's now become much more towards being a norm for many people who are continuing to work today. And so in thinking through what I wanted to say, I thought I'd just start with a very, very basic Christian message that seemed hopefully appropriate. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. That's a sentiment and a call from the Bible that we see being adhered to and followed by so many, many people at the moment in our workplaces and in our communities. Not thinking of their own interests, but thinking of the interests of the people they are caring for. In terms of my own working background, I spent most of my employed life in the social care sector. A bit of a Cinderella service as has become clearer in recent days. So forgive me if some of my thinking at the moment is very much with those who are in the care sector and the health sector too, caring directly for vulnerable people and for people who are very ill. But my thoughts also go to all those other key workers that are still out there serving the public, doing their jobs in the interests of others. And for me, as normally some of my time is given over as a chaplain to the bus drivers and their colleagues in Wolverhampton, my thoughts are very much with them at the moment as well. I'm not able to visit them and to be there with them for obvious reasons, but my thoughts and prayers are still with them and with all the other key workers around Wolverhampton and around this area that are still continuing to serve other people. But you know, I ended my employed life as a senior manager in the social care sector. And these words from the Bible about putting the interests of others first have and should have a new force for anybody who is in a position of authority and power. Because these words apply to them as well. And that people who are in positions of responsibility really need to recognise that it's their responsibility to put the interests of other people, to put the interests of their staff before their own interests. I shall have to deal with God over any time when I, as a manager, fail to do that. But now more than ever, we see the vital importance of everybody putting the interests of others first. When you get into senior management, you have so many experiences that can make you think that you actually are more important than anybody else in the organisation. But now of all times, everybody in positions of power and authority, whether politically or in terms of their position in organisations, need to recognise that they're not the most important, that they must put the interests of their staff before their own. Let's just turn to a prayer. I will say this prayer, it may be for many of you don't necessarily believe in God, but you might just want to use this as a short time of reflection and memorial in your own way. Let's pray. Father, we remember all those who have died because of this virus, especially those who have contracted it through their work. We pray for their family and friends and for their colleagues as they cope with their loss. We pray for those who are anxious about the risks they are facing even now in their workplaces. And we pray for those who are responsible for the safety of people at work, that they would take deep down within their hearts and minds the knowledge that being in a position of power and authority demands an absolute responsibility and determination to put the interests of their staff above their own. And finally, Father, this virus has reminded us that we are not so in control of our lives and of our world as we sometimes thought. Grant us greater humility, that we might also grow in wisdom. In your name. Amen. God bless you in all that you are seeking to do for those in the workplace and those in our communities. Thank you.